Hello everyone and welcome to Just K. To all my subscribers, thank you. I'm so glad to have you join me. If you're new here, sit back and get comfortable while we chat about everything that is health. What is healthcare disparity and how does it affect your healthcare? In today's video, that's what we're going to be discussing. I had this idea when I was doing my last video that how am I to express the importance of managing your own health if I don't give you real good solid reasons as why that is important. So today we're going to go deeper into that. Check out my video pinned here. It's titled The Vegan Breakfast, but in that video we talk about some of the history in healthcare, and today we're going to focus on the disparity part of it. Side note, what is a disparity? A disparity is an eloquent way to say a difference. So rather than saying medical racism, we say medical disparities. This is a topic that's really close to my heart. I worked in medical care for a total of over 15 years. Everything from the person that greets you when you come into your appointment, to the person that rooms you and sets you up for the doctor, to management. I've taken care of my elders, and I have dealt with chronic illness for over 15 years. I have seen the disparities from every angle, and that's why it's so important for me to talk to you about them. I've seen physicians who were really, really good physicians and got burnout just in the red tape and the appointment scheduling, the administrative politics that prevented them from just providing care. So let's get started and let's see if I can make you understand this. So we're going to do some healthcare history, but I'm specifically relating to the disparities in healthcare, okay? We're going to start in the colonial times. Yes, there were black doctors in the colonial times, or I should say black medicine people. The African slaves brought over with them the knowledge of herbs and plants to heal people, which made them low-key preferred over the white physicians. Few of them were even freed for healing their enslavers. Now, slavery was still slavery, so a slave was still a slave. So while there were black doctors, there was also a lot of medical contribution made through the torture of enslaved people. Remember this and keep this in mind as I go through the history, that the propaganda was put out that enslaved people were only 3 parts human, right? So here we go. Let's start in 1735. In 1735, the first general hospital was established in Philadelphia. Black doctors were not allowed to take part in this facility, and I don't believe enslaved people were even treated there at that time. But they were still making contributions either through medical knowledge or torture. For example, in 1942, a man named Onesimus, who was an enslaved man, I believe in Boston. Onesimus told his slave owner, a man named Cotton Mather, that he inoculated himself from smallpox by exposing himself through a small open wound. So what Mathers did was he tried this experiment on 242 other slaves. When only 6 of them died, he took this medical knowledge and ran with it. But Onesimus was still mistreated, abused, and beaten as an enslaved man. But we're going to move on, because in 1807 became the ban on the import of African slaves. That sent the enslavers into a frenzy. It sent physicians, who a lot were also slave owners, into a frenzy. And so this is important for 2 reasons. Medically, what they would do was experiment on black women in order to increase the natural rate of birth so that slavery could continue. On the other front, what they would do would put out propaganda to justify why slavery was important. By the mid-1800s, experimentation and medical torture was extremely common amongst an extremely common practice of white physicians amongst black enslaved people. There was a surgeon by the name of, John Marion. John Marion was considered today to be the father of modern gynecological practices, and here's why. He had a house, a little makeshift medical field or medical tent house, whatever, behind his home. And what he would do there is he would experiment on enslaved women, including providing or doing surgeries on them without anesthesia. The without anesthesia part is going to be a little important later. But what that did was gave him knowledge through the torture of these women, and that is how women who are having difficulty giving birth, the techniques used today are the techniques that came from this guy. So let's move up to 1849. Okay, in 1849 there was an association established for white physicians. It was called the American Medical Association. The reason for this association was physicians wanted a more organized way of doing medicine, and they wanted to be paid for the care that they gave. Understand that black physicians were not a part of this. This was for white physicians only. The banning of black people practicing medicine will come into play even more so in our modern day times, and we'll get to that. By 1951, a white physician by the name of Samuel Cartwright set out to justify slavery. His way of justifying slavery was to create this malady called draponia. And the basic of draponia was that African slaves loose go crazy. His idea was they can be cured, but they had to stay enslaved or caged. And the way you keep them caged is you have them enslaved and you use, hear me, hear closely, you use Christianity to keep them submissive. There were doctors, black doctors, who tried to undo this propaganda going on against enslaved people, but you got to understand that we're enslaved people. So the black physician's voice went this far, where the white physician's voice went this far. You also got to remember that the white landowners who were profiting off of slavery, the last thing they want was slavery to end. So it's really easy to buy into that propaganda. In 1861, oh, wait, let me finish with this doctor, because he went further than to talk about submission. One of his two of his main justifications were black people had smaller heads, which meant smaller brains, which meant less intelligence. However, black men had humongous, this is how he said it, huge, overlarge genitals, which made them overly perverse towards white women. Interesting. Okay, let's move on. 1861. So the Civil War, initially black doctors were not allowed to care for soldiers during the Civil War. Black soldiers were not allowed into the Civil War until 1863. However, they had a 35% higher death rate than white soldiers, even though they weren't allowed in until 1863, and here's why. A, they were offered inferior medical equipment, and B, they were, when they first came into the war, they were used just to dig trenches, and C, when they did need medical care, they were left until everything else was taken care of. Of note, more white people died in this, more people period, soldiers I should say, died during the Civil War from disease than they did from casualties of war. In 1865 came the Freedom Act, making it illegal to own African slaves. This made white doctors switch their torture method because they no longer cared about increasing the natural birth rate of slaves because slavery is illegal. This is also ironically where the ideology that still exists today that black people can handle pain came from during this time. The other thing that's going on around this time is that in the northern states, there was this fear of a flood of black people coming in and taking over white jobs. So the propaganda against black people ramps up. I'd like to point out a performer named Thomas Daddy Rice, who used to perform in a New York theater in the 1830s. And he would take on black dress, talk and walk, and dance a jig that basically says every time I wheel around Jim I crow. And that's where the term Jim Crow comes from. I want you to understand that the purpose of this all was, if you have enslaved people giving you free labor, you're profitable. If you take away that free labor, that takes away your profits. In order to keep that free labor, you consider the people who are giving it less than human, and you put out this propaganda to justify what you're doing to anyone who feels like it's not the right thing to do. So in 1866, the U.S. Army established the hospital to house the significant amount of statistical data that they had already gathered, i.e. the things I just told you before with the ideologies of black people was included in that. And a surgeon named Shaw Billings, built the library of the Surgeon General's office, which is the housing of the medical systems that we practice today. Are you catching on? Are you getting this vibe, guys? Tell me, what do you think? Tell me in the comments, what do you think about what I've said so far? Are you seeing how the history of yesterday has given us the disparities in the medical field and in all over here in America that we as black people suffer today? How do you think it's affecting your health? Get this. Have you ever been talking to your Caucasian homie and you guys have had a similar medical problem, but all of a sudden this Caucasian homie is coming up with all kind of treatments and things that your doctor never told you about? Have you gone back and asked your doctor about it and been told, oh, you're not a candidate for that? I want you to think about that. This is going to be a 3-part video. In part 2, I am going to finish the history. We're going to tie it together, and I'm going to tell you some current stories and situations in my life to give you an example of the healthcare disparities that you suffer today. I have a question, and this is important. What is redlining? Why am I talking about redlining when we're doing healthcare disparities? You're going to see in the next video. I hope you're picking up this vibe, family. I hope you're understanding. Take care of your health. Move around, eat right, think right, mind, body, and soul. Let's be happy and prosperous together, okay? If you're interested in the conversations we're talking about, I've got my playlist right here. Check it out. That's all for today, family. I love you. Thank you. Remember to like, subscribe, and click on that notification bell for more videos coming from me, and I'll see you soon. Bye.
They